The British left this region nearly 75 years back, but the legacies left a lasting impact. Of home, some created perpetual fault line between and among the religion, races, creeds, and some policies were very harsh and regressive in nature. Of those, martial race theory is one about which we know a little degree, but what we don't know is how it made us suffer and how it deepened the genocide in erstwhile in Pakistan in 1971 war. In today's episode, I shall try to crack this enigma and present you with a comprehensive understanding of the myths surrounding martial race theory. This is General Sarwar and you are watching Sarwar's Chronicle. India became the crown jewel of British Empire, the sources of its enormous wealth and riches, not least of which was its enormous manpower that founded the British Indian Army, one of the largest fighting machines of that era. It provided the backbone of British Indian military and helped in controlling the entire globe, including the Indian subcontinent. But things overturned as the native Bengal regiment, soldiers and cavalry regiments rebelled, and the British East India Company needed 18 months to put down the rebellion. The uprising replaced the East India Company rule by the British government rule and brought in huge reorganization package for the British Indian Army that brought in the martial race-based recruitment policy in place. Let's have a look at the process through which military outfits grew in this region, starting from Mughal era to understand the trajectory culminating into the introduction of this martial race theory-based recruitment policy. Before the arrival of the English in this region, most of the invasions took place from northwestern and northern regions. This might have been the reason for which Babur, while setting up Mughal Empire in 1526, he recruited most of the soldiers from trans-Indus races. Use of gunpowder also helped the Mughals, as it helped them in establishing centralized command by creating deterrence, as the Rajas and Maharajas could not afford that. The Mughal army had no regimental structures as such. The mansabs or the nobles, they used to recruit the soldiers and maintain them using the revenue extracted from tract of land known as jaigirs. The Mughal had fairly a good strategic sense, which is evident from their awareness in keeping the turbulent Khyber Pass on guard. Particularly Emperor Akbar, who put guns across Torkham Bridge along the Khyber Pass to deter the invading forces. The Mughals constructed fortresses along the Indus River, not just arbitrarily. All this carried significant strategic and operational sense. After the Mughal defeat, the East India Company, they started pursuing their trading interests by siting trading posts and factories along the coastlines. And for the protection of those business facilities or the trading facilities, they started recruiting soldiers from Centre, South and Bengal region. In 1748, Major Stinger Lawrence was given the responsibility to organize these local regiments in line with the British regiments. From the 18th centuries, East India Company started maintaining forces in Bengal, Madras and Bombay presidencies. These armies comprised British regiments and local regiments. Usually the British regiments used to comprise the British officers and British soldiers, while the local regiments were officered by the British officers and locally recruited soldiers. The soldiers of Madras and Bengal presidencies were drawn from geographically diverse, communally diverse, racially diverse regions, while the Bengal soldiers were drawn from high caste Hindus, Muslims, and at times the untouchables. As you may be knowing, in the Hindu caste system, the Brahmins are the most intellectuals. Kshatriyas are the defenders. They have been defending the Indian borders for a very long time. Then you have Vaishyas, who are the traders, and Shudras are the laborers. Besides, there were also untouchables, were also known as Dalits, with whom nobody mingled. Given such a caste system, the demographic composition of Bengal regiment was very unique in nature. Because of the size, the Bengal army had been the largest army amongst all the presidencies. By the end of 18th century, when East India Company started sending those Bengal regiment soldiers to overseas missions, it was the Hindu soldiers, they were very reluctant, despite the fact that these soldiers, under the leadership of British officers, bravely fought in India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Burma. Anyway, by 18th century, British East India Company was not very comfortable with the Bengal regiment soldiers. High caste Hindu soldiers used to refuse to take order from lower caste NCOs. Even some were reluctant to undertake digging tasks, and critically during the Anglo-Afghan War of 1838, these Hindu soldiers even declined to cross Indus River. After the First and Second Anglo-Sikh War of 1845 to 1846, when the Bengal regiments started recruiting soldiers from Punjab area, that is the time when Bengal soldiers got really alienated. Bengal priests and scholars started to speak up, and situation worsened further when the British started doing away with the Hindu reforms like burning of widows, even worsened the situation. Sentiment of these men owned the support of the Bengal regiments, and the situation was deepening. Around 1850s, the situation particularly in the eastern region was quite, the middle class, Calcutta-based middle class society was booming, and the soldiers being around the commercial and political hub of Calcutta became politically conscious. All that was needed, a catalyst, and the newly introduced Enfield rifle offered that opportunity. For firing this rifle, one was required to unwrap the cartridges by using one's mouth, and it was realized that these wrappings were greased by cow or sow fat, which was unacceptable to both the Hindu and Muslim soldiers. So in protest, the Bengal regiment soldiers rebelled while others did not. The units of northern region, they did not participate in this rebellion, and in the English eye, these are the soldiers, they were the martial race soldiers. Following the uprising, the Peel Commission conducted in 1859, and 20 years later, the Eden Commission, they came out with some startling evidences that the mutiny had been made possible due to the flattening of the differences between Hindu Muslims within the Bengal regiments. Commander-in-Chief of Bombay Army, General Sir Charles Napier, he thought, if these Bengal natives were able to combine and rush towards us, the game would have been over. During the 1860s and 1870s, when Russia took much of the control of Central Asia, it is when the British became very concerned. So the British changed their operational focus towards northern and northwestern region, and it was convenient for them to recruit soldiers from those regions because of the shorter line of communication. In 1886, these armies were brought under the Commander-in-Chief of India, and the Bengal region, since they had the largest armies, so its Commander-in-Chief, Lord Robert, he became the Commander-in-Chief of the British Indian Army, and he was in a way in support of the martial race-based recruitment policy. To the British, the martial race soldiers are physically stout, courageous, but they lacked intelligence and ability to command larger scale units. Besides, they possessed mercenary spirit and lacked nationalism, for which it was easier for any commanders to employ them as per their will. Political reliability, however, became important as education increased in Bengal region and across the Gangetic Plain due to the deliberate British policy adopted after the 1857 mutiny to educate the Indians by setting up 3 universities in the areas of Bombay, Madras and Calcutta. These are the reasons for which the British shifted their recruitment focused from Bengal and Gangetic Plain towards the Punjab and northern area. By 1893, the British recruited 44% soldiers from the martial races, and that reached nearly 75% towards the end of the First World War. It is when our rebel poet Qazi Nazrul Islam also joined in the British Indian Army towards the First World War. By the end of the war, nearly 40% soldiers comprised the combat arms of British Indian Army or during the wartime army. India supported Britain on the promise of standing by democracy, but unfortunately towards the end of the war, instead of democracy or any kind of reward, India was offered with some regressive policies like Rowlatt Act, which is also known as Black Act, protesting which Mahatma Gandhi led his famous non-cooperation movement. So this was the time when British soldiers, they were coming back home with a lot of confidence and agility, particularly the return of Punjabi soldiers in Punjab region aroused a lot of political activity, particularly in 13th April 1919, when a lot of women, men, people were celebrating the Pohela Boishakh. Many were gunned down by British officer Brigadier General Dyer's gunman, and that really marked the infamous massacre by the British forces on Indian soil known as Jallianwala Bagh incident. So in the wake of First World War and also the anti-British resistance, there was a huge requirement of additional soldiers, and that's why we see that preceding the Second World War, there was a huge rise in the number of British Indian Army that rose from 120,000 to 200,000. During the World War II, there were hardly any Bengali representation in the British Indian Army. So during the war, it rose to 4%, while the representation of the South Indians rose from 3 to 18%, and correspondingly, the number of martial race soldiers declined. Now, if you look at the Indian Army right after the partition, the certain areas were well off just because of their access to military salaries and pensions, while many did not. And it was clearly the outcome of the martial race-based recruitment policy that was in vogue. Shortly after assuming office, the India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, he wrote to the Commander-in-Chief and also the Defence Secretary to bring in some reforms to rationalize the demographic composition of his army. This was certainly a very bold decision, considering the deplorable law and order situation that was prevailing due to the larger scale migration and also because of the armed forces which was deployed on the ground. The territorial and regimental reorganization following the partition brought in some fundamental changes in terms of demographic composition of martial race and non-martial race soldiers within the Indian Army, and slowly and gradually the number of Bengali soldiers increased and the martial race soldiers reduced. Now, if we turn towards Pakistan, the situation was complete opposite. The British refrained Punjab from industrializing because that would divert the manpower in some other sectors other than the military, and in the Punjab, for contributing to the military services, the peasants were granted lands and other benefits. So is the land-owning elites. They were also in support of the British because of the benefits they received in terms of contributing to the Pakistani army. This made the army an enticing profession for the Punjab peasants, and the trend continued even after 1947. During the partition, Pakistan received 19% of the population, 17% of the revenue assets, and 33% of the British Indian Army, a huge military force. Of this, 72% of this mammoth force was represented by only 25% Punjabi population, as opposed to almost nil represented by 54% Bengalis. The army, once raised to defend imperial interests, fought its own people at home and also fought the central power, including Ottomans, now assigned with a very different task of defending Pakistan. So to make it relevant in the public eye, it had to orchestrate threats along its border. All this helped in developing Pakistan military as a quasi-military organization that only grew in arrogance and assert in country's politics. The same was reflected when the Pakistan army went into war immediately after the partition within 2 months, and it engaged in unending war in Kashmir. The economic cost of the war was very high, particularly considering the formative years of a newly born country, and surprisingly, it had to allocate 80% of its budget for the military in 1948. Then Brigadier General Akbar Khan, who participated in this war, was very unhappy with Liaquat Ali Khan's government for the extent of support it received from Pakistan government. He thought the war should have continued because he was only 4 hours short of Srinagar. However, the ceasefire enacted, but the undercurrents went on. The Pakistan government had many teething issues like the migration problem, refugee problems, language problems, the constitution writing problems, and certainly the over-centralized Governor-General's Act of 1935 are some but few. The weak political control only empowered the civil military bureaucrats, where the military had the steering. In early 1951, there was a consensus to nationalize the national institutes by putting the homegrown officers in command. So that was an opportunity to put the army in the right perspective, but that was not to be. There were clearly 4 potential generals who could become the next commander-in-chief of Pakistan Army. Of them, General Akbar Khan, then General Iftekhar, General Ishfaq al-Majid, who was a Bengali general, and General Naam Raza. Of them, General Iftekhar was earmarked to be the next commander-in-chief, but unfortunately, he died in a plane crash. Surprisingly, all the 3 other generals were bypassed because Defense Secretary General Mirza, he was lobbying for General Ayub Khan, whose name was not even in the list. Now, you must be wondering as to why a Bengali Mirza would lobby for Ayub Khan. In fact, a descendant of Mir Jafar, a highly greedy, power-hungry military bureaucrat from West Bengal, given such a legacy, what else he could offer? So ambitious Mirza, to fulfill his requirement, he had no option but to be close to the Pakistani ruling clique and also the military bureaucrats. So it was not possible without adopting an anti-Bengali policy, which Mirza exactly did. And it was proved while he became the governor of West Bengal some time back. General Ayub Khan, as commander-in-chief, a ethnic Pashtun, it was considered that without a ethnic badge, it won't be possible on his part to carry out some military coup. But interestingly enough, the Punjabi-dominated Pakistan army was requiring a commander, and General Ayub Khan or General Ayub Khan's appearance raised that hope. While there had been thoughts of nationalizing the commander-in-chiefs of various armed forces, but the texture of the Pakistan military never changed. Therefore, the resulting ethnic imbalance within the Pakistan army never changed from Punjabi-dominated army to a national army for leaving out the Sindh, Balochi and the Bengali population from enrolling. As such, whenever the Pakistan army was deployed to quell any internal disobedience or any internal crisis, it was always Punjabi army versus the Sindhi, Punjabis versus Baluchis, or the Punjabi versus Bengalis. So the such recruitment policy continued, and throughout 1950s and 60s, the Pakistan military recruited nearly 75% of its members from Punjab. This has seriously affected the monolithic force of the Pakistan army to be able to deal with domestic and outside threats. So in 1958, through martial law, when Ayub Khan came to the power, the Punjabi the interest of the Punjabi-dominated army and ambitious Ayub Khan somehow converged to serve each other's cause. So under Ayub Khan's brutal rule, the systematic expulsion of the Bengalis, both from military and politics, really created the ground for a war that was offing. As the war began, we saw how Pakistan military acted on the soil of erstwhile Pakistan. They have killed people, raped women, bayoneted kids, carried out wanton destructions. The scale of genocide the world hardly seen before.
One of the reasons why there is a Bangladesh today is the fact that troops from West Pakistan, Punjabis, savagely terrorized the Bengali population of East Pakistan. Perhaps 1 million people died. Here now is some blurry videotape taken 10 months ago, hidden since then, of how the terror began.
This slightly blurry amateur videotape, which has been kept hidden for the past 9 months, shows Pakistani soldiers executing students, professors, and workers at the University of Dhaka last March 26th. The first sequence shows Pakistani soldiers forcing students to carry and pile up the bodies of victims already killed. The tape was made secretly by a professor of engineering on a portable tape machine hidden on the roof of a building about 300 yards from the killings. A Pakistani execution squad lined up slightly to the right of the center of the screen. About 20 people were herded onto the killing ground from the right corner of the picture. One man, dressed in black, dropped to his knees and begged for mercy. The Pakistani soldiers opened fire. One man was left standing after the first barrage. He was finally killed by the Pakistani soldiers seen with a rifle. Then the Pakistanis went among the bodies, shooting close up to make sure their victims were dead. This is just one small episode of the Pakistani massacre.
This was nothing but the result of flawed recruitment policy of Marshal Retd. So here I end. This must have generated some bit of interest, those who take interest in the national security and military matters. Thanks for watching. Goodbye and Allah Hafiz.